Hello, operators. Welcome to second edition of Smooth Operators by Live Docs. This episode, we have Ramli John, a podcaster, an author, a frequent speaker, and he's also leading a content team at one of the coolest SaaS in the world. Welcome, Ramli. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and your current role at AppQues, other initiatives?
Yeah, my name is Ramli John. How do I call myself? I love all things growth related. I'm also love creating content. Uh, I'm like you mentioned, I'm currently the content director at Appcues. I create thought leadership content around onboarding, product adoption. Because prior to Appcues, I was at Product Led, where I wrote a book called Product Led Onboarding, which is all about the best way to onboard your users to your product. And I've been in SaaS for many years, like 15 years almost, working in growth, and
Right.
that's where I'm at. I'm a nerd for growth and content.
Right, amazing. I remember meeting at SaaS Open in San Francisco, right? And you were like super bullish about product-led growth during your speech over there. And I mean, you have a diverse background in marketing from startups. What initially drew you into the field of like product-led growth in general?
Yeah, I was working for a lot of companies that were product led before it was cool to call it product led. They had a free trial and freemium offering, and I just find it fascinating that first of all, there's a little bit more data because people can log in for free. And I think that's where I got attracted to onboarding, and how that I got into it was I was working for a SaaS company, particularly based out of in the Bay Area, and I was working in growth. So I was, even the term growth back then, I was in charge of getting new users to sign up for the product. As a
Right.
consultant, they were happy with all the users I was getting signed up, but I was curious if people were sticking around, and I found out a stat that's now popular and people might have heard of it is that 60 to 80% of users, they sign up once and they don't come back. That's a stat from Intercom. That's what they found. And that was something that I also noticed for this client of mine way back then before this stat was real. It was like a lot of people I'm bringing on are the users are not sticking around. So I got started in like really digging, how do I get them to stick around? Because like, what's the point of getting them to sign up if they're not going to see value in the product and become, happy users and customers of that product? That's when I got connected with Wes Bush. He wrote the book on product led growth. We were both studied in the same university, University of Waterloo. Different years, of course. I think he's like 10 years younger than me. So
Right.
he started this company, and we ended up working together. And then I wrote this book around this. That's my journey with product led growth and user onboarding in general.
Right. I remember meeting Wes as well at the conference.
Yeah.
He's a pretty crazy guy. I mean, he knows a lot about product growth, to be honest. Uh, yeah. And also like seeing your LinkedIn, like like you have like big experience, like big companies like GoDaddy, Mixpanel, Microsoft. What shaped your approach to PLG in general, or even like what is that really drove you and like evolved you as a person, as a professional in this marketing and growth domain?
Well, any kind of resource specifically, or like what was like the thing that made me evolve in this field? Is that,
You've seen like user segments at like different market
mm.
levels and at like different companies. Like, let's say GoDaddy is very different from Mixpanel. How was that? Like, what kind of challenges did you face? How did you navigate that? What was the first 30 days, 60 days, 90 days was like? Everything, right?
Yeah, those ones I worked with at GoDaddy, I was working in house, and then Mixpanel was a client. We had a product led. One challenge I see a lot, especially as companies start getting bigger and past, like, let's say 50 employees, is a topic around alignment. I think alignment is such a loaded term, but like when I say alignment about, first of all, what is growth? Is it, are
Right.
we talking about user growth? Are we talking about revenue growth? There's like, we got to pick one. And if everybody's not on the same page, what that is, then it becomes all over the place. There's also alignment around what is activation. I think even that as a core is super important, because if you're not all on the same page, customer success might be doing something, and then marketing might be sending emails that is focused on something else, and then product might be focused on another thing. And of course there's alignment around like what is our, what is our, not just our activation, but like what is our main KP, like what is our goal per se, like what are we trying, how much are we trying to improve it. And that's why I'm a big
Right.
fan of making sure everybody's on the same page, whether that's through in-house workshops where you would like, oh, let's workshop through this using Miro or post-it notes, what onboarding or what activation, what user success looks like, and getting like a team going together, a cross-functional approach. And it's really important because product-led growth, onboarding, a lot of big growth initiatives
Right.
are cross-functional. They have to be like, it's really like the tough problems often involve multiple teams, and if it's not, then it's gonna be like trying to row with one hand tied behind your back, which is gonna be tough.
Oh, I agree, 100%. Like, I mean, I've seen this problem a bit, right? Like, especially with like large orgs, marketing and sales kind of work in silos, and the communication is kind of broken. Usually, right? I mean, so what marketing calls as leads is very different from what sales
Mm,
considers as leads. So that there
100%.
is a ICP differentiation, or like
Yeah.
the the definition kind of like shifts. It's kind of
Yeah.
morphed out by the time it reaches sales. So, but then growth kind of sits in between all of this. And
Mm,
it's like this foundational block that's kind of like moving it, or like whatever's happening, like you exactly defined, it's kind of cross functional. It's kind of like taking a little bit of everything.
yeah.
And when we go back to again the definition of being cross functional, like how do you manage that? Like, how do you think companies can be more cross functional?
Mm,
What are the
that's
metrics
good.
that they can share? Can they be more data driven? What is it?
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's multiple levels of being cross-functional. At the highest level, when you have a cross-functional squad, I see this for more mature companies, like Elena Verna. She's like the interim head of. I think she's taking full time head of product, head of growth at Dropbox.
Amplitude.
She,
Oh,
yeah,
at Dropbox, sorry.
she left. Yeah, she left Amplitude. She's at Dropbox now
Right.
full time. Is she has squads. She has teams for activation, for retention. It's cross functional. They have product growth. They have, I think they have a copywriter or designer. Not entirely sure, but like they have that cross functional team ingrained. Not everybody's gonna get bought into that specifically, where that does require buy-in from the highest level of executive, where they're like, okay, we're bought in. This needs to be cross functional. um, really small things that people can start doing is asking. One of them I love doing is asking for feedback earlier, like across functions. So like if there's
Right.
a design or a copy, or there's like a campaign or product design, asking somebody from another team earlier on and looping them in and getting feedback kind of removes the, oh my goodness, you've launched this to production already and you forgot about this thing from marketing, which is like one thing. It's a challenge. I think building that partnership, people within other functions that can give you feedback, no matter what function people are listening in to this, is super important. That's one easy way to start being more quote unquote cross functional. You mentioned around metrics, around alignment, and just like
Right.
having like meetups, like very informal, like 30-minute catch up on a quarterly or a monthly basis. It's like, oh, what metrics are you guys looking at? Across functions could be super important as well. The other thing that I've seen done, usually run by growth or product, is they do like cross functional brainstorms. One that I've seen really done well is like when you're trying to figure out what activation is. I've seen somebody, and I do this now as well, where you would pull in multiple teams on a mirror board, or if you're going to do it in person, you would do it in a room with post-it notes and just like, okay, what does our success for our users look like? What emotions do you use? And then just running a workshop. I know Google has a whole like design sprint around this, but like it doesn't have to be a full sprint. It could be like just cross-functional brainstorming. It could be an easy lift to be quote unquote more cross-functional and getting different teams talking to each other.
Right. Got it. Right. I mean, you also wrote the book called Product-Led Onboarding, and I'm sure like you're like pretty like savvy about onboarding because you keep writing about it on LinkedIn as well, and I keep following your content. All of them are pretty gold, right? And in the book, you kind of discuss about the concept called like product adoption indicators. You also talk about like a bunch of other metrics and indicators, but this kind of caught my eye. Like, could you explain for the audience like what PAIs, like that is product adoption indicators, are, and how they differ from traditional onboarding metrics, or if you have any other onboarding metrics that are more crucial than that, like how do you enable that?
Yeah, I would say that the it I'm trying to quantify or measure the end goal of onboarding. People think onboarding is like, oh, getting them to that one value moment or activation moment or aha moment. But
Right.
this is something I've heard across the board from people who are working in onboarding. The end goal of onboarding is to build a habit for users. And how do you measure that? And that's where this concept of product adoption indicator, I've heard this term. I borrowed this from the former head of growth at a company called Wave. They're a financial tool for entrepreneurs. And it's something that they found, I think they call it product adoption. Uh, yeah, they did call it indicator, where the concept is like, how do you know at what point like they've done something enough times that they've built a habit. Like an example is like, if usually it takes 2 or 3 times for you to do something before it's become a habit. Somebody said it takes 30 days of you waking up in the morning every day and running, and then that after 30 days it's like you're gonna do it for life. Right?
For sure.
So how do you
Yeah.
quantify that? And that's where the product adoption indicator comes in. I like to keep it simple. Like, if they've done the activation moment or action multiple times, then that's a good indicator that it indicates that they've adopted the product. Ones that I've seen, like Slack has, I don't recall this, and you might know this earlier, but like if a user, if a company has sent 1,000 messages or something like that, then they're like
Right.
93% more likely to continue using Slack going forward. And that's a strong indicator that they've adopted that. Of course, that requires a lot of data and like analyzing it, correlation. Those are like a lot of stuff that a lot of startups, even a lot of companies, especially B2B, wouldn't have. So I would just say, just keep it simple. Like, find one action and then get them to do at least twice, and then push it forward. Like, get them to do it 3 times. So like, when I say do the activation moment, like a simple one would be like, let's say like Riverside, what we're recording on right now. The activation
Right.
moment is like recording your first podcast session or your first session. uh, ha- and, uh, and that indicator for them most likely would be if you recorded 2 or 3, then you're more likely to indicate that, first of all, if the first call was terrible, you're not coming back. Right? But if you're like, if
I
you've
agree.
done it 2 or 3 times, it's like, there's an indicator that you are happy enough that you continued recording with it. So I think that's essentially what product adoption indicator is. It's an indicator that is there's a habit being formed by the user itself.
Right. Wow. So I think it's like such a like a diverse term. It depends from like org to org. For example, if it's a data org, it's going to be different. If it's going to be like a mid-market SaaS, it's going to be very different.
100%.
Uh, but that's really cool. Like, I completely agree. Like, so far, I've always thought about like this, like you clearly defined like this one aha moment, and then you're like set. But it's clearly, I mean, like that's not going to cut it, right? But you also like develop this framework called the QREKA framework for onboarding. So just when we're at onboarding, I just want to know, like, can you explain that, what it is, and how companies use it to improve their onboarding process?
Yeah, it just helps me to think about the structure and steps to onboard to improve your onboarding. I mean, we've already been talking about the first one, which is around creating that onboarding team. So like, establishing an onboarding team is super important. U is around understanding user success. So each this is an acronym. It's something simple to understand. Use around understanding user success. I think that's important to start. I like to call it starting from the end, or I call it reverse journey mapping, where like you can't know what
Right.
you're building towards if you don't know what the end is or destination. So that's a second. R is around refining your metrics. So we're talking about product adoption indicator, your activation moment. Yeah, and then E is you start establishing or building that first step milestones that users will need. And then K is around keeping those users. So what do you do in product or out of product that helps keep those users engaged? And then finally, A is like you got to apply and repeat. So that, it's a not a one and done. I think that's the thing with growth or anything or including onboarding where you can't just like set it and forget it. It has to be like an
Right.
iterative experimental process that a lot of folks like Sean Ellis or Brian Balfour talks a lot about, where like it needs to be uh, high, quick feedback loops so that you can continue to improve. So that's what I see often where people working on onboarding is just like, oh, let's just do it and then we'll forget about it for a couple of years. That's not the way to do it.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Oh wow, this is just bringing to me another question. So when you say about this repetitive, ongoing process, right? Like for example, when I fix onboarding loop, let's say for like my product, and tomorrow if the R grows, the product grows, I have like a few more features coming in, and now there is going to be like a different set of an onboarding. Like how do you tackle that? Like do you kind of go and revamp the entire
Mm.
onboarding, or like do you change the metrics? Like what matters? Like how do you measure what's going on?
Yeah, that's the challenge for a lot of companies where the product evolves and now they have a lot of features. Often what happens is they just stuff it in and it becomes onboarding becomes like this bloated thing. I would suggest borrowing a concept from video games actually,
Oh,
where like Super Mario Kart or any kind of video games where how they uh, onboard their players is they onboard them in levels or stages. So I would think
right,
about like if you release a feature, is this something that is part of level one, which is here's like this new user, they're trying to do something, whatever it is. Riverside is record their first session, Calendly is to book their first meeting. Will this feature help them achieve their initial goal, their level one problem, their level one goal? If it's not, then maybe it's much later. Level two is more for like intermediate players who are like, oh my goodness, I already know the basics, let me go to the next level. For Calendly, that's like maybe um, integrating Stripe so you can get paid if you're consulted, or doing if you're a sales team, it's doing round robin calls. So more advanced
right.
stuff that might be not for new users. This is for intermediate. Then you could have more levels. Level three would be for advanced. These are ones that are already like regular and like you want them to continue using it. So I think that's how I would think about it. Is like if your product is evolving, where does this fit in terms of the user journey? Or is it for beginners? Is it for intermediate? Is it for advanced? Is it for hyper hands, so to speak? So that's how I would categorize it and think about how to figure out where it fits in. So like in this case, like you notice, there's like multiple levels of onboarding, and that's what I love. Like onboarding is not just the first initial one. You're also onboarding other types of user in terms of where they are in their journey and stage.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Wow. I mean, that makes a lot of sense because we were just about to like launch a new feature at LiveDocs as well, which is more of aligned with Jupyter notebooks or starts, which is probably going to be just consumers. And I think I need to go back to the drawing board and see like how do we onboard these new users. We cannot just onboard anyone. Uh, just zooming out a little bit, going back to PLG, just want to think about like, so whenever I have this conversation with anyone about PLG, they think that, oh, there is this magical way to just onboard new users or like acquire new users without spending anything, without having a sales team or anything. I feel that is one of the strongest misconceptions. But what are some of the other misconceptions that you think like that you come across or encounter whenever you talk about like PLG, and how do you like sort of clarify them?
Yeah, I think one you mentioned one of them. They don't need sales team. That's a real typical
Right.
one. I think the other thing is that typically when people think about in terms of what is product led growth or what is PLG. They think, oh, it's a company that has a freemium or a free trial. I have experienced free trials where it is actually really hard to use and it requires you to call sales. And I'm like, this is a fake. I remember what is that company? OpenView called it the faux product led growth, where they fake it.
Oh,
So this is not product led. The better definition I understand, like for me, what product led is really about focusing on making sure your end users are as successful as possible, and
right,
that could involve sales. I think that's what's key is like now with that definition, sales could be involved in that process. How do you make them successful? How do you become consultative? So you approach it with that. And how do you make the initial experience as successful for the end user as possible? When you're buying shoes at a shoe store, sometimes asking an attendant, hey, do you have this size 8.5 or 9, whatever your shoe size is? If that's not possible, then it makes it hard for the end user. The same
right.
way, like how do you make the end user as successful as possible? Because this is something from the West Bush talks a lot about. Your end user becomes your end user success becomes your success. And to me, that's like a great phrase to put a bow tie around product led growth. That could mean free trial. It could mean freemium. It could even mean having sales. It can mean asking the new user up front, like, "Hey, what do you need?" And so I think that's a good another misconception around product led growth.
Oh yeah, completely. And just thinking about this whole having a salesperson to help you out in general, I love the fact like how I can talk to someone at HubSpot, for example, and get my startup discounts sorted. That has always helped. But also thinking about how AI has been evolving lately, right? Like it's been like coming up pretty fast. Whatever is going on in the AI world. What is your thoughts on how is it going to like ease the enhance the onboarding process or even the product like growth in general? And like, what advice do you like have for companies looking to integrate these technologies?
There's this great presentation by, oh man, I don't remember her name. She works at Miro and she's talking a lot about AI. One of the thing that she said, and I agree with, is that AI will bring the age of hyper personalization. And I love
Right,
that because there's a ton of data around what a user already does, a lot of data around, hopefully if you can tie it, what pages on your site they've visited. And based on that, there's still a challenge for us. And I love asking the question when onboarding asks the question, what are you here to do today? Are you here to do option A, option B, option C? A lot of products, this is great because then you can customize the experience. Canva does
right,
this, Miro does this, Mural does this, we do this at AppQues. But like, what if in a world where there's data and this machine learning and this AI, it can already pre-predict exactly what your intent is and craft an experience customized and personalized to exactly what you're trying to do. At this moment, there's a lot of like, if you're using a tool like AppQues or Pendo or User Pilot, you'd have to map that out. You'd have to pre-plan it out. You'd have to add all the steps that they would need to do. But there is, the idea that users will always find new ways to break your product and use it.
yeah,
So that would be a super interesting case where now, through through AI and through the data, it can create paths specifically for that user based on what they're trying to do. We talked about level 1, level 2, level 3. The reason why a lot of companies don't do that in terms of like staging their onboarding, because it's a lot of work. And what if, based on your behavior, AI can suggest what features you should do next. So it's almost like a coach, almost like a mentor that is personalized for that user to get the most and to build the most habit out of that specific product. I don't know any product that does this. If you could ask me, like, Ralphie, what tool does this? It's like I haven't found one, but I'm just in my head like, wow, that would be so cool if there is a product that can do that, where it can pull in all of your educational content, your videos, your help desk, your knowledge articles, your flows, your tours, and then it would craft specifically based on that user's learning habits or learning patterns or their preferences, and based on what they've done already, they can craft that experience for them.
Oh yeah, I remember. I think someone. I really don't remember exactly the person who it was on Twitter. It was either Greg Eisenberg or Peter Yang or someone. Uh, they were talking about how you should, or like some product should just scan everyone's Spotify listening history or YouTube history, and just craft the experience based on that, right? Like craft a dating app experience based on that. That'll be nuts. I think that's where AI can really, really hyper personalize for people.
Yeah, that totally makes sense.
Yeah. So, and like you've been consulting and you've been helping like a variety of firms like for their onboarding, for their PLGs in general. Do you have, or like, can you share any success story where effective onboarding significantly improve your user retention and conversion rates?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that we're working at Appcues. Got a chance to work with the former product manager here, where going back to this level, the idea of staging in level one of the things that we experimented with was breaking down our our onboarding checklist into two stages. The first stage is just install our builder, because our builder, with it you can create experiences and you don't need code snippet installed on your website. Once you've installed
Right.
that, you bring to like level two of the checklist, where like it asks you to start building, set up your goals, do this. And rather than having them all together in one checklist, we saw with all to combine there was like 2% completion rate. And the last step is like launch the flow in your site. And so essentially our activation rate, since our activation is defined as launching or publishing a flow, is 2%. But when we broke it up, we found that it increased from 2% to like almost 25% completion rate, which is huge. And just the concept of, first of all, breaking it up into stages, but like having the first checklist as just one item, and then the second checklist having three items, was dramatic in so many ways. We were surprised, delightfully surprised, of course. But looking at it, one of the principal psychology principles that we found was effective here, as well as the idea of it's called the principle of consistency and commitment,
Right.
where if you can get them to do something easy first, they're more likely to do something hard. So like if you only have one item at the front, then three items later, it dramatically improved that completion rate for us. So that's one example of a case study that was like I'm really proud of.
Oh, sweet. I love that, and I'm also like a fan of psychology. Like in general, like so whenever something breaks, when we launch a new feature or like anything like an MVP or whatever, right? So we have something called as like, I mean, you might have been familiar with a service recovery paradox. So you kind of show a broken product first, like which is kind of broken and like chopped up experience, and then when the user comes back, it's like, oh, it's smooth and fancy and onboarding and everything is amazing. They'll be like, oh wow, okay, cool. They'll just forget about all the like nitty-gritties that's going on in the background. So I completely agree. That's pretty cool. And now just going towards like the last few questions, like what future trends do you see emerging in the realm of like PLG onboarding in general, like growth or even user onboarding? Like what is your thoughts in general?
Yeah, I think this is a product of our the state of the economy, where a lot of people are talking about efficiency,
Right.
and I'm seeing a lot more push towards like not just like opening up everything, but optimizing for conversion and profitability. A lot of the product led growth influencers, people talk about product led growth, have been talking a lot about reverse free trial. The
Oh
idea
yeah.
that get them a free trial first, and then if they don't upgrade, go to freemium, but usually ask for a credit card upfront first. And that usually increases conversion rate. That is a trend I'm seeing at the moment. I think that's, especially with the focus on like I said, efficiency and profitability. Will that will that stick to the end? I'm seeing things like our starting to get better here in Canada. We bank of our bank has reduced our interest rate. I heard the same thing for US. In other countries, like they are seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, and
Right.
I think that, yeah, product led growth will be, it's here to stay. I think, first of all, I think that's one thing that I'm very bullish on. But like, the second thing I'm seeing is like more talks about how to involve sales. You mentioned that earlier as a misconception. That's
Yeah.
still really hard. I think, how do you, especially for B2B, how do you involve a human touch without annoying the user? And that's real. I think AI will be more and more upfront, but not necessarily as like, oh, here's AI that will help you write your copy, which is a great use case already, but
Right.
more so like digging into the data. When is the best time for that specific user? It is for sales to reach out. Like, what words, what trigger moments exactly that would increase the 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 reply rate and response rate for that specific moment. I think there is a lot of opportunities for AI to use beyond just for copywriting or creating images or AI generator, but like exactly that use case where like it's more predictive of and like I said, hyper personalized for specific users.
For sure, for sure. I mean, as of today, I think AI, the best thing that it does is like probably write copies, like you just told. The most used is ChatGPT.
Right, or brainstorming,
It's
give me variations of this headline, which I use all the time. Like, well,
yeah.
so it is, you're totally right.
So yeah, I mean AI, and then also like at the same time, like it kind of there is this ongoing fear among people in general, like, oh, am I going to be replaced by AI? So like when all these things are going on in such like this fast growing world in general, what we have around us today, what advice do you have for like up and coming aspiring marketers, product managers want to excel like in this current economy?
It's a really good question. I think I would say that, and this is something that I've heard from other folks as well, where there's a lot of things that AI can do, but the problem with AI is that it's the average of all the data that is picked up from its knowledge base, from its scraping. And the problem with that
Right.
is the output will always be the average, right? It'll be always be this the what's accepted. And the problem with that is it's not, it'll suggest things, but it won't push the boundaries per se necessarily. And that's where a lot of people are, if you want to be on product or design or growth or marketing, the best place to be at is where you're not in the tactical side, but you're also thinking about it from like the why strategically, like what should we do next based on all this information around me, based on my experience, my first person perspective. Here's
Right.
where I think we should go, and that's not something AI has. It has all this data. It could suggest things, but like to take that leap, to take that risk is something that uh, you know that's where people will go at. That's a challenge with people who are new to the field now. Like, where do you go? Because you don't have that experience, you don't have that ideas, right? Because you're just starting out. That's where I would suggest like leveraging and finding ways to use AI, make it easier for you. I think that's people talking about prompt engineering and making sure that you're looping it into your thing. There is an art and a science to crafting like AI or chat GPT prompts, or in general. I think there's we'll see more courses uh,
Oh yeah.
about that, and I think people are still figuring out what good, how do you get the most out of our AI, large language modeling programs.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I myself seen a lot of prompt cheat sheets being locked behind Gumroad and other paywalls in general. I think that's become like a market in itself. Like usually like some time ago it was Notion, like Notion templates. Now it's prompts, and soon it's going to be like something similar to that.
Totally agree.
That's really interesting. So so yeah, like I mean, kind of towards the end of my list. Before we wrap up, like, is there anything else you'd like to share to our audience? Like any upcoming projects, books,
Yeah.
events you're excited about?
Yeah, I would say I have some cool announcements coming up this fall of 2024. I'm writing a new book. It's about delight. That's user delight, customer
Amazing.
delight. So that's something that I'm currently working on. I think people can find out more about it. I don't have a website for it yet. It is still
Right.
in the works. People just follow me on LinkedIn. I think Ramli John. Uh, there's no other person with that name. If you do find somebody with that name, let me know because that's really interesting. So Ramli
Right.
John, Ramli John on LinkedIn, and you can find out more about that when I announce it.
Amazing, Ramli. Thank you so much. I mean, this was so refreshing. And thank you so for joining us today and sharing your insights. It's been a pleasure having you on the podcast. And
Thank you.
got